We're dealing with the statement of Paul in Galatians 2:20. Probably it'd be good if you had your Bibles open to that passage. I think I'll read it again. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God. I prefer to say the faith of the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. I consider that to be what I would call an explosive verse. If you embrace that and begin to receive its real implications, it'll create an internal explosion in you. If the church embraces it, it'll create an explosion in the church. It's a dangerous verse. If you don't want danger, stay away from Galatians 2:20, because it has to be handled with care. We've been speaking about some of the manifestations of the uncrucified ego. I'll just review them quickly and then we'll move on. Pride, egotism, personal ambition, sectarianism, nationalism, and racism. And I state these corrupt many ministries and churches. I think we looked at the way in which the church has been corrupted by some of those things, like racism and nationalism. I think perhaps it would be appropriate just to take a little longer to consider the effect of those things in ministries. And I have a ministry to which my name is attached, and everything I say potentially can be and should be applied to me. Obviously, the area of ministries is an extremely important one. In many ways, it has a decisive influence on the course that the church takes. And I want to speak from personal experience and personal observation. I think I briefly gave you the example of Abraham and Isaac earlier in this series. This is one of the remarkable facts of the Bible. God gave to Abraham this miracle son, Isaac, on whom all the fulfillment of the promises of God depended. And he was God's gift to Abraham. And yet there came a point when God said to Abraham, I want you to offer your son, and he was very specific, your son Isaac, whom you love, as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of Moriah. And the New Testament indicates, especially in the Epistle of James, that this was the climax of the whole walk of Abraham in faith, that he was willing to offer this son up. At the last moment, the Lord intervened, restrained his hand, and provided an alternative sacrifice, a ram caught by its horns in a thicket. And then, after Abraham had passed that test, God said to him, because you've done this, in blessing I will bless you. That's Hebraism. The duplication of the word bless is extremely emphatic. In blessing I will bless you, and in multiplying I will multiply your seed, that is, Isaac. The very thing that God had demanded from him, and he had been willing to offer back to God. When he offered it back to God, God said, now I can multiply it. Now I can release my full blessing upon it. Now my full purposes can be worked out through it. And I just want to say that over the years, I've come to the conclusion, partly out of my personal experience, partly out of observing other men and other ministries, that every time God gives us an Isaac, there'll come a point in our walk with him where he'll ask for Isaac back. And that is perhaps the most critical point in any ministry. A ministry is an Isaac for the man who has it. It's God's gift. It's supernatural. He can't do it by his own efforts. And all the purposes of God, in a sense, depend on that ministry. But in His inscrutable wisdom, it seems to me invariably, at some point, God will subject a man and a ministry to that test. Give it back to me. Put it on the altar. Take your hands off it. It's true I gave it to you, but in the last resort, it's not yours. It's mine. And I am the one who determines what will happen to it. And I think the destiny of every ministry is determined by the way in which a man responds to that challenge. The person who responds in faith and says, God, I give it back to you. And I think a person who does that feels as Abraham must have felt. This is my future. This is the most precious thing that God has given me. This is the thing that makes me specifically what I am. It's my future. It's my continuance. It's terribly hard to say, Lord, it's yours, not mine. I'll give it back to you, and whatever happens to it from now on, it's your decision, not mine. I'm not going to fight for it. I'm not going to promote it. I'm not going to do everything I can to make it successful. God, it's yours. As far as I'm concerned, it's dead. The man who will do that will experience what Abraham experienced. In his own way, and when the test is complete, God will give it back and say, now I'm free to multiply it. I can release my blessing through it. And I can do in it and through it and for it what you could never do by your own efforts. But the other side of the picture is the man who says, God, this is my ministry. You gave it to me, and I'm holding on to it. I'm in charge. My name is on it, whatever. Something happens to that ministry. It's hard to describe, but I would say it becomes corrupt. There's a new stream that's injected into it, which is a stream of pride, arrogance, self-assertiveness, self-promotion, self-ambition, and that whole ministry becomes corrupt. Doesn't mean that it ceases. It doesn't mean that it doesn't produce results. It'll go on producing fruit. But Jesus said in Matthew 7:17 and 18, a corrupt tree cannot bring forth good fruit. And what the fruit that it brings forth will be corrupt. I think this is one of the great tragedies that happens in the church. I can think of two specific instances which I could name all the persons involved, and I will not even contemplate doing that. Both of them happen to focus in Israel. And anything that touches Israel is of special concern to me. And in each case, I've seen a ministry that had tremendous potential, had a special anointing of God upon it. There came a point where a leader asserted his personal claims and his personal ambition and the right to keep his name on it and have it imprinted with his stamp. And I would have to say, according to my interpretation, in each case, that ministry has become corrupt, still goes on, still brings forth fruit, but it's corrupt fruit. See, the problem in the church really is not that ministries don't continue. The problem is that they do. The big problem of the church is ministries and movements and groups that once were anointed, once were blessed, and once were fruitful, have moved out of the line of God's blessing, but still continue. I think it's a mark of spirituality when people are willing to close something down. Say, all right, we've done what God called us to do. That's the end. We're not going on just for the sake of promoting. I would say that basically most movements that come into being in the church, at the end of 10 years, their supreme objective is to keep the institution going, regardless of whether it's accomplishing what it came into being to accomplish. Self-perpetuation, an almost irresistible law that you can't set aside except by the cross. And I would have to say also, and this is right in line with Galatians, in each of those ministries that I'm talking about, the Holy Spirit has been replaced by witchcraft. And the dominating forces at work are manipulation, intimidation, and domination. And if it were appropriate, I could give specific examples of each. I'm not going to. But I just say that because I want to make it very clear that I'm not theorizing. Now, I talked about Israel because it's quite a long way away from most of you. But I would think whatever is true in Israel is probably 10 times truer in America. I think it's perhaps the greatest single tragedy that we're confronted with regularly in the church. And I say my spirit weeps for men who've taken the wrong route. For men who've held on to Isaac. He's mine. My name is on him. Don't ask for him back. I'm the only one that controls him. So, I hope you can see it's something very, very real. It's not remote. I've been exercised about this for perhaps 20 years in my own life. What is my ministry bringing forth? Has it become a corrupt tree? And that's not for me to answer, nor is it really for you to answer. But I just point out that it's not something that's abstract or theoretical or that applies somewhere else. I have to consider its application in my own life. But to me, as I say, this is a problem that I have seen increasing for 20 years at least. And one of the great releases from God came to me when I saw that Galatians states the problem and supplies the answer. Because I had been groping around. I don't want to be critical in a negative way. I don't want to say, well, this is wrong and that is wrong and that's not working and that's not producing good fruit. What I want to know is, what's the solution? What's the remedy? What's the safeguard? And the answer, I believe, is the cross. And there is no other. And any work or ministry or group that does not submit in due time to the principle of the cross is going to become corrupted. And it's not for me to estimate the proportion of ministries to which that has happened. That's not my job, but I would say it's not a little. I would say it is a common problem. It really blesses me to think that Galatians wasn't written as a theological treatise. Paul didn't sit down and say, and I've got to establish 6 points of doctrine. He wrote a letter out of a burning heart and deep concern. He probably wrote it in a rather inconvenient place. He probably didn't have a good desk. He didn't have a library. He didn't have a concordance. He just wrote. But when you analyze the structure of Galatians, it's perfect. Because right in the middle, Galatians 3:1, it states the problem, witchcraft. And preceding that and following that is the answer to that problem. The answer is the cross. And I would go so far as to be so simple as to say, we either submit to the application of the cross in our lives, or we become the victims of witchcraft. You see, I pointed out in the natural order, witchcraft is the old man reasserting his illegal dominion. It's his way of getting what he wants without submitting to God's authority. And it's always the assertion of the ego. The wife wants her way. She doesn't want to submit to the authority of her husband. So she doesn't flap, rebel. She just knows how to manipulate him. So he thinks it's what he wants. He doesn't even realize it's what she wants. Let me observe, one easy way to manipulate men is through their stomachs. And quite a lot of wives regularly use the way they feed their husbands to get what they want out of their husbands. Furthermore, let me say this is just by the way, but I make no extra charge. A lot of wives don't want their husbands to be totally committed to Christ, because that would mean they would be totally committed, and that they don't want. So they have a dozen different ways of frustrating the commitment of their husband to Christ. Now, I thank God that I speak as a person who's been married twice, and each of my wives has been totally committed to the Lord. And if it were not so, I could never have come as far as I've come. I could never have overcome all the subtleties and the barriers of a scheming, manipulating wife, who would use a lot of religious language, but she wouldn't want to make the total sacrifice that's demanded by the cross. She's got a nice home and beautiful furniture. God calls her husband somewhere, but she doesn't want to leave. She doesn't say, we won't go. We'll disobey God. She just manipulates and blocks every time he's going to step out in faith. Now, again, I could put names to what I'm saying. I'm not interested in doing so. I just want to tell you it's not a theory. That's just one of many different examples. There's the mother who, when a daughter is married, doesn't want to release control. So she has her finger in that marriage, manipulating, scheming, writing letters, making suggestions, and often undermining the husband's legitimate authority to get her way. But you see what the essence of it is? I want my way. And I'm going to get it. It's not legitimate. I can't get it by legitimate means, so I'll get it by illegitimate. And the same is true in the matter of the ministry. I want my way. I want to do it my way. I want the results I want. I want the credit I want. I want the glory. I can't do it by legitimate means. I want to hold on to my authority. I don't want to be challenged. I don't want to be questioned about the morality or the ethics of what I'm doing. I can't do that by legitimate means, so I'll use illegitimate. And that's how witchcraft comes in. Witchcraft comes in on the uncrucified ego. And the only protection against witchcraft is the cross. You can decide right now, do I want to be a victim of witchcraft, or do I want to be preserved from it? If you want to be preserved from it, you are going to have to accept the application of the cross in your life. Oh, it's so beautiful when you see the cross sets a boundary to Satan's territory. And there is no way he can get beyond it. Once you have been through the cross and it's done its work in your life, you live in territory where Satan just doesn't know where to find you. Ruth and I have a verse we say together because we travel so much and we're in such sometimes difficult or dangerous places. You wouldn't normally apply this verse, but it's become very real to us. It's in Job 28, verses 7 and 8, and then verse 21, and I'll say it for you, because to me this describes what it means to live beyond the cross. There is a path which no fowl knoweth, which the vulture's eye hath not seen. The lion's whelps have not trodden it, nor the fierce lion passed by it, seeing it is hid from the eyes of all living, and kept close from the fowls of the air. And the fowls of the air and the vulture and the lion all represent satanic agents. But Job says there's a path where Satan's agents can't even get. Where is that path? I'll give you the reference in a minute. Where is that path? Beyond the cross. See? That's the only safe place. Give you the reference. It's in the King James Version. As we've said before, the one that Paul used. Is it 28 or 27? 28, isn't it? And then 21, isn't it? Now, 21, you might say doesn't fit there, but I think it does. You see, we're talking about an area that's out of this world, as understood in the terminology of the Bible. We have been delivered from this present evil age. Well, I could go on this theme, because to me it's one of the critical issues of contemporary Christianity. But I think we'll move on and consider the results of deliverance from the ego, the results of applying Galatians 2:20. Now you'll see it there at the bottom of page 4. I'm going to amplify it a little. You may need to keep your writing instrument handy, because you may need to add a little. The first result is freedom from striving, from self-effort, and from self-promotion. And oh, what a freedom that is. Oh, what a freedom. Let's look at 2 Corinthians 4:5. 2 Corinthians 4:5. This is a very remarkable statement. Paul is writing to the Corinthian church, and he reminds them in his epistles what kind of people they'd been. Pimps, prostitutes, homosexuals, drunkards, just about everything that was vile and unclean.